Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Nancy Drew Game Review Series, where we are ranking every single Nancy Drew on 6 key aspects, being the story and premise of each game, the suspects, the puzzles, the music, the atmosphere, and the ending of each game. I'm your host, Jameson.
And I'm Julian. What's going on, everybody?
And today we are reviewing Nancy Drew number 17, Legend of the Crystal Skull.
I think it's just safe to get out there that the community is very fond of this game. I think it's just about in everybody's top 10 list. I don't see many doubts about people disliking this game. Yeah, I think it's widely revered as one of the best in the community, honestly.
This is the black sheep of the franchise, I would think. It takes place in about the middle of the series, and there are design choices in this game which you don't see in any others, weird formats. The game begins with a screen that says, "It's best to play this game in a dark room. If it's daytime, draw the shades. If it's night, turn off all the lights."
Yeah, this is the only Nancy Drew game with any type of thing like that. It's like they were marketing it as a horror game almost, and to be frank, it is one of the scarier games until Shadow at the Water's Edge dethroned that, in my opinion. But
one of the strange things about it is that it's probably one of the scariest games without much of a supernatural sense. It's purely gothic in its terror and spooks in it.
Oh no, I think there is a supernatural sense, honestly.
Well, yeah, but not in the sense that there's like a ghost going around or anything. There's voodoo and stuff like that, and you could call that supernatural, you could call that power of suggestion. But I think that this game does an incredible job of just having a unique, gothic, spooky feel to it that no other game has. And if I was making these games, I would not have thought to make a weird occult-like game like this.
To get into the case assignment, Nancy's boyfriend, Ned, one of his friends, Henry Bolet, word has just gotten around that his uncle has passed away. And Henry, when he was 8 years old, both his mom and dad unexpectedly died in a car accident. So Henry's kind of always been alone the majority of his life. His uncle was really the only presence there that was in his life. And once word's gotten around of his passing away, Nancy's conveniently going to New Orleans on a vacation, and Ned is asking simply for Nancy to go check up on Henry, make sure he's doing okay, you know, not too far in the slums. And
so the game begins with an opening cutscene of a dark, stormy night, Nancy walking up to the Bolet estate, just coming to pay her respects to Bruno.
The entire game is super rainy, too.
Oh yeah, this is probably one of the most weather-intensive Nancy Drew games. The weather directly affects the plot. It's the reason why Nancy can't get a cab to leave the manor at any point of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But, Nancy comes up, and she has to click on the front door to use the great knocker on it, and then it just kind of drifts open. And she walks inside and goes, "Hello, is anybody here?" And there's muddy footprints on the floor. And I'll always remember this. We should go ahead and clarify, if we didn't already, this was the first Nancy Drew game that we ever played. And I think it's kind of funny, because this one had a very, very different style from the rest of the franchise.
Definitely.
It still sucked us in. So, anyhow, Nancy follows the footprints, takes an immediate right turn, and ends up in the foyer, where someone is looming over this scale model of a cemetery that looks like a coffee table. And Nancy goes, "Hi," the door was open, and the figure turns around, and it is a skeleton man wearing a red ascot and a leather jacket and fedora and just trench coat. Lightning cracks, the lights go out, Nancy looks around in the darkness, and then they flicker back on, and the man's right in front of her. He reaches for something in his coat, throws it at her, it explodes, and Nancy passes out. So Nancy comes to with a strange woman hovering over her, insisting that she drinks this green concoction grass smoothie thing that she's got. And she goes, "Here, drink this. Take just a couple sips," and you can go, "Well, what is it?" And you go, "Something that'll make you feel better. Come on, just drink it." And the player can choose whether or not you trust this strange woman with being illuminated by just lightning crackling. And, Nancy can choose to drink the drink or not.
Sadly, there's no difference, like, in the gameplay or anything. It would have been pretty cool if, like, maybe Nancy had, like, hallucinations throughout the game if you sipped this or something. I don't know. Can you just, it's not, like, a big pet peeve or anything, but, like, you know, it's a slight what could have been.
As for why this game is called Legend of the Crystal Skull, we basically just covered the opening there, but you don't really figure out the whole plot until maybe an hour in. Basically, Bruno Bolet, who was about 95 years old when he dropped dead of a heart attack in his foyer, was apparently in possession of one of the 13 legendary curio crystal skulls. Skulls that were made entirely out of crystal, thought to be brought to Earth by alien life forms, and each one was said to have a magical power that it would bestow upon the owner. And Bruno was allegedly in possession of a skull known as the Whisperer, which has been known to make its owners immortal so that they cannot be killed by any natural causes. But however, Bruno died of a heart attack, and whether or not he actually owned the skull, no one really knows for certain. But there certainly was a lot of talk about it in being in his possession. So, The more Nancy begins to investigate and try to figure out who the skeleton man was that knocked her out, the more she gets sucked into this weird world of voodoo and crews going on in New Orleans, and the strange supernatural being that could be the Whisperer Skull, and whether or not Bruno Bolet's heart attack was or was not foul play.
It's just a genius storyline. I really loved that idea.
This storyline for me is a 9 at the least. And I don't know if it was an adaptation of one of the later books, but I believe that this story is like the sole intellectual property of Her Interactive, and that they made this entire story for this game.
And props to Her Interactive if that is the case, because this is truly a remarkable story. It's just an awesome idea that they brought to life, so. Okay, let's just jump into the characters now. The characters in this game, they're a really weird spectrum. Some of them don't feel like suspects at times, and a lot of the time, there's just a lack of suspicion, or more so a lack of motive for each suspect at points.
So, not every character in this game is a good suspect, in the sense that some of them it just seems nonsensical to assume that they're the culprit. But at the same time, though, every single character in this game is an amazing character.
Yeah, their presence just adds miles to the game. Like, I can't imagine this game without Lamont. You know?
My god.
But it's not like Lamont's gonna be the culprit. You never suspect it. But like,
Lamont could be my favorite character in the franchise.
I literally can't imagine the game without him. Okay, so I want to jump into suspects. We'll start off with Henry Bolet, the real centerpiece of the game. He's who Nancy's here to check up on, after all. Henry Bolet, his style is kind of like gothic. He's got like, it almost looks like he's wearing black lip gloss. I don't know. He's got like bangs that come down over his forehead. He's got black hair. He just seems like a really depressed guy, and rightfully so, as we'll get into his girlfriend troubles later.
He's a very human character in the franchise, I feel like. He's always gloomy. He's got a sense of humor. Great Uncle Bruno named him executor of his estate, meaning that he had to make sure that all of his assets are taken care of and debts are just made sure that they've been paid before anything can be distributed. And as he says, I have so much dialogue from this game remembered. I've been playing it for like 10 years now. Unfortunately, he couldn't have cared any less about little things like keeping records or balancing checkbooks. Dealing with his creditors and their lawyers has been an absolute nightmare.
The first dialogue with Henry is really cool, actually, because he opens up to Nancy about his real feelings for Bruno, because it's kind of revealed Bruno really neglected Henry for the majority of his life. He goes on this little spiel about how he always sent him off to boarding schools and military camps, and he never really felt like a priority to Bruno. And it's really sad, but it also breathes his character to life, and you can really feel the emotion and the depression in Henry. And that's what makes him one of my favorite characters, honestly, is because it's, I don't know if relatable is the right word, but he just seems so human.
Yeah, I definitely feel like they hit the nail on the head when it came to making Henry relatable. I think that he just has such like a funny personality to him. I wish that they would bring him back in another game, but I'm not sure what purpose that would serve. He has this very first line is after Renee, the housekeeper, tries to get Nancy to drink the concoction. He goes, "Don't make her drink any of your weirdo concoctions. Then I really will have to take her to the hospital." And the whole time during that opening cutscene, you never see Henry, but he's constantly just like fuming with anger with the people he's on the phone with. Like at the end of the conversation, you just hear him go, "I should call them and keep them on hold for 5 hours and see how they like it."
Yeah, he's got some of the best lines, honestly. And something that isn't necessarily like a core feature to his character, but it's worth noting, is that about 50% of the time when you initiate a conversation with him, you get this pretty cool like 2 or 3 second long animation of him like swiveling around in his chair and everything. And in my opinion, Legend of the Crystal Skull, this is the game where Her Interactive really stepped up their game in terms of character animation, because the characters in this game, lip syncing is a 10 out of 10, they're beautiful, they have real emotions, and I gotta say they're all just super well done.
I feel like in White Wolf they started, you could see that the character models were much different in White Wolf as compared to Kapu Cave, but it wasn't until this game when seeing them up close looked almost lifelike.
Definitely. Now I want to touch on a little subplot that goes with Henry. It's core to his character. He has a girlfriend, Summer, who is just the definition
Gold digger.
Oh,
and
yeah, she's...
And this man doesn't have much gold to begin with.
Yeah, no, she is a gold digger, and Henry is just shelling out all of his life to be in Summer's life. When you confront Henry about this horrible situation he's locked in with this girl, Summer, he goes on another depressing monologue about how it's his first girlfriend, he's so worried he's gonna lose her. And for me, it's just, I think of it from his perspective, you know? He has nobody in his life. He just lost his only real figure in his life, his uncle, who didn't care about him much in the first place. I can only imagine how much Summer means to him, though the love probably isn't reciprocated, and he's probably locked in something that's just horrible for him.
Yeah, I think that that's a good way to go ahead and bring up Renee, as far as people Henry doesn't like go. So, Renee is the only other verifiably real or living person, as Nancy would say when talking to Wade and Thornton Hall, that's living on the Boley estate. And by the way, the Boley estate is massive. There's a giant cemetery that it overlooks that you can explore throughout the game.
Oh yeah, we're gonna cover a huge portion on atmosphere.
Definitely. But Renee lives out in this little gardening shed that's right outside of Henry's place. It took us maybe like 2 weeks to find it when we first played this game. Eventually we realized you could turn left as soon as you go outside, which is like, oh my god, we found her. And she goes, Nancy, welcome to my little lantern-lit corner of the world. And Nancy goes like, oh, it looks like you like to grow things. And he goes, oh, yes, I just like to make fresh herbs and stuff. And Nancy goes, there's nothing like cooking with fresh herbs. And then Renee just goes in like a hushed voice, I don't use these herbs for cooking, darling.
Oh, that's one
like stoner Renee.
Yeah, I mean, that line, the context of that line has kind of changed from modern day.
I mean, I think that it was implied that she was like, you know, it's her voodoo stuff.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, you know what they were going for her character, and I think it worked really well, is like that southern witch doctor vibe.
Yeah, she's they find out from a later character, Gilbert Buford, we'll get to him in a bit. She is apparently deeply involved in the practice of voodoo, and that she believes in hoodoo and voodoo. I'm not sure which one's which, but they're very similar, I think, or maybe they're not. I'm not an expert on this.
Probably just insulted someone so much.
Yeah, I just insulted all the witch doctors in our audience, all 33 of our witch doctor subscribers. But anyhow, let's see. On that note, hoodoo, for those of you who do not know, is the kind of like a superstitious practice that is basically hinges on the power of suggestion. It's all about good luck and bad luck, and do certain rituals and daily routines you can take to kind of hedge your bets against the supernatural powers that control the universe, as Renee puts it. Nancy asks Renee at one point, why are you still on the estate if Bruno's dead? And she goes, because I always hold up my obligations in my end of the deal. And she claims that there is a pretty sloppy distribution of the estate. Henry's supposed to receive like 50%. Some lady, some like dentistry thing that Bruno worked for, Bruno was a dentist by the way, receives 20%. There is a charity called Our Lady of something, I can't remember, I guess 20%, and then Renee just receives 10% of the estate, which can still be a whole lot.
Oh yeah, I'm sure 10% of Bruno's estate is well over 6 digits.
And also like 30,000 buried corpses, so there's a little bit of explanation that's needed because it's important to the story, where Nancy goes poking around in the fireplace in the room where Mr. Skeleton Man was, and she finds a crumpled up receipt for some place called Zeke's, order 21-73A something.
21-372? Isn't that it?
3872 something like that. Lamont says it so distinctly.
No wait, 21-3872. That's
7
21-3872.
Nancy asks Henry about it, and Henry denies and goes, oh, I don't know what that is. He says some curio person may have come in here and took a look around, but it wasn't anything formal. Mind you, that it would be illegal for Henry to be liquidating anything from Bruno's estate now that since all of his assets haven't been appraised yet. And so that's kind of suspicious. Anyhow, Nancy gives Bess a call, who's in her apartment on the French Quarter looking out on the rainy balcony at the just curio shops and everything below. Nancy gives her a call, and you switch to Bess's consciousness, which is always just a treat in these games, whenever you get to switch around characters.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be my favorite instance of switching characters in any game ever.
Oh, it's definitely mine.
Bess has such a good time with
I love all of Bess's dialogue. Nancy never gets the interaction with Lamont. It's all done through Bess, but I love every conversation with Lamont. He's a small little curio shack owner on the French Quarter of New Orleans. And gosh, this store that he runs, Zeke's, it's so unique. And I've never been in New Orleans, but I gotta feel like there's real places like this. It's just a super sketchy, super eerie curio shop with a bunch of knickknacks. Some are really weird, but it's so cool.
Yeah, it was always just so cool exploring this place when we were younger, just tapping on the giant green tank with like the wolf monster thing in it, and then it just starts growling at us. But anyhow, we'll get more into that in atmosphere. There's so much to cover for atmosphere in this game. And so Lamont he goes, hey there, doing a little bit of end of the day shopping, are we, or something? Mm-hmm. And Bess can just be like, oh, I like everything, and stuff like that. And eventually, but it should be noted that Bess does not like snooping, and she's very begrudgingly agreed to look at this for Nancy. She just goes and talks to Lamont. Lamont's just an interesting guy, and later on, you can talk to him about if he ever came into contact with a crystal skull, and if he's ever found them in his world of sifting through junk of other people's things. Mm-hmm. And he says suspicious stuff like, funny, I've been thinking about those skulls a lot lately. And it's just so suspicious. I feel like they put it in there just to make him remotely suspicious.
No, that line of dialogue is the only, motive you can claim Lamont has at being a culprit in this game. He's really just... Right off the bat, you dismiss him. It's like, there's absolutely zero way. This guy is whoever navigated Bruno's death. But Lamont serves such a great purpose in this game, because Zeke's Curio Shop is a focal point of the game, and Lamont's interest in the skull and all of his little knickknacks all play a vital role.
I think we should wait for puzzles before we get any more into the awesome Rube Goldberg contraptions there. But one last thing I want to say about Lamont is one of my favorite dialogue trees in the entire franchise, where Bess goes, seeing as this place is called Zeke's, and it's your place, shouldn't your name be Zeke? And Lamont goes, the guy I bought this place from wouldn't sell it to me unless I kept one condition. He told me to not change the name. So I didn't. Funny thing was, his name wasn't Zeke either. We just thought that was so funny when we were younger.
Yeah, no, Lamont's great.
Lamont's just so chill. And as far as the last character in the game goes, he's the all-but-retired Dr. Gilbert Buford, who was Bruno Bolet's best friend, who pronounced him dead of a myocardial infarction. And he sits on underneath a little awning, eating gumbo from his favorite gumbo stand, Granny Pumpkin's Cajun Cookin', right outside of Lamont's. And later on in the game, Bess gets sent to go talk to him when his answering service redirects Nancy to say that he likes to hang out there. It's kind of complicated, but Gilbert, I could probably call him the worst character in this. He's
Yeah, I mean, it's cool and all that it's revealed he was the skeleton man from the beginning of the game that knocks Nancy out.
You see, he's actually a cult leader. I forgot about that when I called him the worst suspect, so actually he is a really good character.
Yeah, he's really dynamic because you learn more and more about him throughout the game. He's got a really sketchy motive and just an interesting guy all around, but...
Basically, you start to learn about Crews, which I thought was fascinating. Krewes, I think that's how they spell it. It's like French or something. Anyhow, in Mardi Gras, there were little private clubs that threw really cool parties called Crews in New Orleans, and they would basically organize parades during Mardi Gras. And in the late 90s, apparently, the city demanded that the Jolly Rogers crew, which was famous for dressing up as skeletons with ascots and leather suits, like the one that attacked Nancy, they were ordered by the city to open their doors to the public, otherwise they'd have to shut down. And so, Jolly Rogers did shut down, and they no longer exist. Or so they say. Because it turns out that they've been operating in secret, like a secret society, for almost 10 years now, and that Bruno Bolet was a member, and Gilbert Buford came to be the leader of the Jolly Rogers.
And one of the best parts of the game is having to go undercover and infiltrate one of the meetings. Bess has to put on a costume in the back of Zeke's shop, and then she has to learn the password Scuttled Bones and sneak into this meeting. It's a really cool cutscene, and then that's where Dr. Buford's character really starts to shine. He shows his true colors, that he's this cult leader, and then he talks about the crystal skull, and that's where the storyline really hinges on the skull.
Gosh, I'm just so in my element reviewing this game. This is going to be a long review, and I'm not even ashamed to admit it. I have so much to talk about because this game is just remarkable.
Okay, I think we're going to cover puzzles now.
First thing that I want to bring up for puzzles is a really ominous character line that comes towards the beginning, where Nancy says that she just wants to go poking around the estate talking to Henry, and Henry goes, look around as much as you want, though I should probably warn you, Uncle Bruno was into exotic pets. Didn't believe in cages, so he gave him the run of the place. And just because he's dead doesn't mean they are. So if you're gonna go poking around, be careful. And sure enough, this man doesn't just have an iguana that lives in his air ducts, a giant spider that lives in his fountain. I don't even know if that's supposed to be his pet, but he certainly trained it in some way. This man has an alligator in his swamp who he feeds marshmallows.
Yeah, I really liked that silly part of Bruno. I don't know, it was pretty funny, but just as important as his pets, I'd actually say more important, is his 25 glass eyes. It's probably the main puzzle of the game, honestly.
Oh, I totally forgot to bring that up.
Yeah, so Bruno was...
Eccentric.
Yeah, eccentric's a good word.
He never married.
He only had one eye, and he was big on glass eyes, not a big eye patch kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he has 25 of them that are very well hidden throughout his estate, inside and out. And Nancy takes it upon herself that to go on this little scavenger hunt, she needs to pick up all 25 glass eyes, and then it's really the final puzzle of the game, really.
But you're collecting these eyes throughout the entire game. It's a fun little scavenger hunt.
And each eye is super unique and cool. I mean, I can name some of my favorites off the top of my head. There's a really cool red eye that has a brown slit in it, kind of like a cat's eye. The cat's eye, there's a couple cat's eyes one, I think, but there's like blue, bold blue eyes.
He has some that just like, why would you ever wear this in public? You're gonna like give children nightmares if they make eye contact with you.
Dude, he's Bruno Bollet. He can do whatever he wants.
Okay, he is Bruno Bollet. So, anyhow, this man, his house is full of glass eyes. Nancy finds the first one in a trophy right next to Henry, and she goes, I just found a glass eye. Did Bruno Bollet wear one? And he just goes, yup. Wore a glass eye for as long as I can remember. He had all sorts of them and wore a different color every day. And different colors, an understatement. This man had eyes where the iris was like the radioactive hazmat symbol. But
a bunch of puzzles in this game revolve around getting the eyes. Much bigger puzzles, the reward from them is just getting a couple of eyeballs, and it's definitely the focal point. I say focal point too much about that. It's definitely a main part of the game because it leads up to the final in-game puzzles, having to arrange them all in the right order so that you unlock a key. But moving on to some of the puzzles that are leading to obtaining some of these eyes, one of the biggest ones of the game is definitely the graveyard hunt, and Her Interactive really outdid themselves with this one because it's a really... I definitely call it difficult.
Puzzle.
Clever is definitely the word for it, but it's also difficult, but it's not too difficult.
Yeah, there has never been a reskin to this puzzle. I believe it's solely unique to this game, unless it's in like Stay Tuned for Danger, because that's the only game I haven't played, and I really doubt it. So basically...
And it's a great way to immerse the player into the environment, too.
Yes.
Because in order to do it, it's a scavenger hunt that pretty much makes the player have to go to every single screen in Bruno's backyard / crib / cemetery. It's super cool, and it leads to a bunch of other things that are important to the plot.
So basically, once Nancy opens up a secret passageway, which there's like a crypt you get into, and then you get this painting in the crypt, and you rearrange the paintings to this little ledger that you found in Professor Hotchkiss's book, which, by the way, this is Hotchkiss's first reappearance in the series after Treasure in the Royal Tower. It's been like 13 games since we've seen her. But, what do you call it? This puzzle, it's so clever. It starts off with last name buried on my estate is the beginning to your hunt. And so Nancy goes to this Book of the Deceased, this ledger that's kept in the foyer, and she goes all the way to the end of it. It's just like keeping track of everyone who was buried, when they were buried, what their names were, and where they were buried. And the very last name in the book is Tammy Tasselman. And it's kind of difficult to get started on this puzzle, but once you figure it out, it's just such a fun time. And so Nancy puts in the name, Nancy goes, that must be right, and you see like, oh, Tammy was buried at Terra Siesta, which is a different crypt that was in New Orleans, which, by the way, if you don't know, in New Orleans, due to frequent flooding, all the corpses are usually buried above ground in mausoleums and crypts. So you don't see any like gravestones on the grounds. They're actually like houses of the dead, and they're so cool.
So to sum up this puzzle, Nancy has to keep on putting names into a ledger of...
They're all riddles, because like you'll go to Tammy's grave, and his epitaph is like died in debt, and so you go back to the ledger and you read through maybe 10 pages of names and just read every single one and try to figure out if one of them could be the answer to the riddle, and then finally you see the name Owen Moore and you're just like, I get it, died in debt, Owen Moore.
See, each name is a pun on the previous epitaph.
And then it just leads from epitaph to epitaph. Some of them are really hard. You go to the site that they were buried, and then finally it gets you kind of stumped because you have to call Bess back and have her sneak back into Lamont's place. Okay, we gotta talk about the Rube Goldberg puzzle now.
Yeah, I know, but finish the
graveyard puzzle hunt essentially just leads to a glass eye and a little pirate's hat, which you need to get more glass eyes. But oh man, the reward is really just having that puzzle itself. It's such a clever puzzle, and I always love doing it.
Now, I'm pretty sure Jamie and I share the same favorite puzzle in this game, which is sneaking into the back of Lamont's shop right in the first quarter of the game, honestly. It's just a super elaborate Rube Goldberg machine, and for those that don't know, a Rube Goldberg machine is It's kind of like a sequence of puzzles, a sequence of little things that...
It's all about chain reactions.
It's kind of like dominoes, but without the dominoes, if that makes sense.
You gotta get creative.
Yeah, one thing has to initiate another thing, which leads to another thing happening, and another thing. It's just a cool series of events, and it's so much fun to break into the back of Lamont's shop, because Bess has the task of having to arrange a ton of bizarre things in Lamont's curio shop so that the sneezing powder ultimately gets pressed into his face. He goes into a crazy sneezing attack, and then that's when Bess... It's kind of silly, actually. She sneaks into the back of the shop with all the time in the world. Lamont is seriously dying.
He's sneezing up his insides.
But if you want to dive deep into the puzzle, it's just super great. We should cut it in.
You know what? We could. I think that out of respect for how much fun this puzzle was, we will show the full sequence of events right here.
Sure, what do you need?
I can't quite reach that bottle up there. Could you get it for me?
Sure.
Oh no! Oh my gosh! Oh shoot! I'm sorry. I'll go get you something. What do you need?
No spray.
But one thing that I think is important to note during this puzzle is there's something you need to pick up while you're in Lamont's. And while you're browsing, there is this little cabinet full of strange powders, and they're all labeled really scantily. It's just like a hiccup powder. Bess opens it up and takes a whiff, and she starts hiccuping. Crying powder. Bess takes a whiff, and she starts crying. Sneezing powder. Bess takes a whiff of that one, and she starts sneezing, goes, this might come in handy. And that's like the clue that you need it for this puzzle, and so she takes it. And so...
Can you imagine if, like, we used the crying powder? Lamont can't stop crying as Bess is in the back shuffling through his stuff.
It would be so sad. But one thing that I want to bring up later in atmosphere for visual storytelling is that there is already a little spot missing showing that one bottle has already been claimed or purchased by somebody. And that's just a clever piece of visual storytelling that we'll get to later.
The Buzzard Puzzle is super unique. It's a little annoying at first because there's so many times when you feel like you're just right there, but I mean, the pull of one wrong buzzard head and all the feathers shake in the way you don't want them to. It's just a really interesting puzzle because, I don't know, I think you could do a better way of describing it.
It's all about listening and trying to understand patterns. There's this great big buzzard statue over Bruno's crypt that has all these brilliant red feathers on top, 6 plumes of red feathers. And by pulling on the buzzard heads of the smaller statues around it, you start to hear these clicking noises, and they'll be like... And I'm poor at imitating it, but basically, you want to you want to just get them in a certain configuration that is seen in Bruno's journal, and I think that's something very important we should touch on. Bruno's journal. So, Bruno Bolet keeps a journal in his study, which you find, that is just full of clues and clues and clues to help find the crystal skull.
It's like the key to like 6 puzzles in this game.
And if we haven't already made it clear, the whole point of this game is to find the crystal skull that Bruno apparently was in possession of. And there's a brilliant phone call with Professor Hotchkiss, one of my favorite conversations of the whole series, where she ultimately vindicates Nancy and says, "Are you saying that Bruno was in possession of the Whisperer? The scalawag! Why didn't he tell me?" Oh, that's right, I would have hung up on him. But anyways, Hotchkiss says that, like, if Bruno really did have the Whisperer and he died of a so-called heart attack, then you'd better give that heart attack a second look, Nellie, because if he had the skull, then he didn't die of a heart attack, or my name isn't Beatrice Gertrude Winifred Hotchkiss.
Okay, I think it's a good place to bring up the phone call with the authenticator.
Yeah.
It's a really key part of the story, and it's my favorite phone call in the game, actually, because it just sounds so serious. There's, like, some implication there that, like, this is where it's clear that foul play was afoot when it comes to Bruno's death.
This is a little after the halfway point in the game. I'll just give a little bit of coverage for how this works. Nancy sends Bess to go talk to Gilbert Buford, and Gilbert and Bess determine that Bruno died while reading a letter because he saw an envelope on the floor when the paramedics came to haul Bruno away. And Gilbert concludes that the letter must have been taken by Iggy the iguana, which is an iguana that Bruno apparently befriended and then let loose in his house, and then developed the annoying habit of stealing paper. Nancy knows this all too well because Renee keeps her paper in a locked drawer in her room, which is where she has to go to get it. So anyhow, Nancy has to give a loquat to Iggy the iguana, who lives in the air vents in Bruno's study, then dress him up as a mailman, and then Iggy will go back into the vent and retrieve a letter from the authenticator.
Now, this is super cool. You get the letter,
And it confirms that the crystal skull is a fake, and then it says that this skull can show marks that were used of like 18th century or 19th century tools, showing that it was man-made and is not actually all this old. And it's also important to note that like you can't carbon date the crystal skull because crystal is pure quartz and there's no carbon in quartz.
so it's implied that upon reading this letter, shattering everything he believed in, that his prized possession was the real crystal skull.
And that there was the only thing keeping him alive at 95. Bruno's heart just gave out and he died of a heart attack.
Now that is the most unique, I guess you can call it, murder I have ever heard of. Because it's obviously revealed that the letter is fake. It's forged.
That's the coolest thing. That's the phone call Julian was talking about, the authenticator. This guy, Chaz Milo, is on the treadmill, so he's like out of breath during the phone call, and you constantly hear the treadmill in the back. And Nancy goes, I wanted to ask you about this letter that you sent to Bolea saying his skull was fake. And then he just interrupts you and goes, I didn't send him that. I told him that that skull was real.
And then that's... I got like chills the first time I heard that line, honestly, because that's when we know something greater is at work here. Someone's really pulling at the strings.
And this creepiest thing I always thought was that he's out of breath. He says, look, lady, I'm not saying it's magic or anything. All I'm saying is that that skull was not made with 20th century, 19th century, or even 18th century technology.
So there's obviously some, like, this skull is ancient. Like, it's the real deal. But obviously Bruno didn't know that. He was given some forged note from the authenticator, which is super sketchy. So the mystery kind of morphs into who made this forged note, because someone obviously wanted Bruno gone.
All right, I think that we should just tone it back on puzzles now and move on to music, because we've done way too much time on puzzles. There's so much to do in this
puzzles
game.
is great.
This game is amazing for puzzles. We're not even going to talk about the short stories for Tired Eyes puzzles that are in Bruno's book, but I do love the nautical nonsense and pirates puzzle with like the super encoded directions in it for like the eyeball puzzle at the end. If you've played this game, I'm sure you remember the puzzles fondly too. You probably also had to use spoilers, but
For the teeth puzzle, at least.
oh, the teeth. I'm bad at the teeth puzzle. I'm bad at the clock puzzle. It's a rough one because I can never tell if I'm supposed to rhyme heaven with 7 or 11. But I digress.
Okay,
So,
music for this game is another 10 out of 10 in my opinion.
You know, I'm gonna be honest. Music might be my least favorite category for this game, just because of how much everything else excels. I think that the ending is even better than music.
No, the music makes this game come to life.
Right,
if
you
the
take it away. Then.
suspects
You
don't.
take it away.
My favorite track, I have 2 of them. One doesn't play as often, which in my opinion adds to why I like it so much. It makes it super cool. It's like, ooh,
Legends track.
Legend's on. It's time to focus on the game. I don't know. The track's called Legend. I'm gonna play a brief snippet of it here. This game plays, in my experience, most frequently when Nancy's out in the backyard cemetery. A lot of it has to do with the scavenger hunt, but
This
it's
song-
it ramps up gradually. It gets intense. It makes me feel like something crazy's about to happen.
This song plays during the ending cinematic cutscene when you open up Bruno's crypt, and it's synchronized and composed so well that the song gets super dramatic and climaxes just as you find the crystal skull in Bruno's crypt. And I think that was just brilliant design.
There's a lot of saxophone into the music of this game, which
Yeah,
is like
that's
it's like a down south type instrument.
It's a staple of New Orleans culture. There's a lot of Zydeco feel to the music.
Yeah, so it makes the music so great for the environment. And another one that I love, it's a much slower, on the contrary type soundtrack, is Curio. And Curio plays, obviously, it's pertaining to the curio shop Zeke's.
Curio is just like a nice, loose clarinet or something, but by far my favorite part about it is just the vinyl crackle at the very start of the song where it comes to life.
I know, no other track is like that.
Now, one thing that I want to distinguish is that, to me, the music in this game has just about 2 different settings. There's the cool, smooth jazz like Curio, and then everything else is just creepy as heck. Well, every now and again, when you start a game, whenever you take your first step after Renee leaves you, after trying to get you to take the concoction, the first track that you're greeted with is just this. That track is titled Bruno, and brilliantly so. It sounds the way that Captain Jack Sparrow walks. This game does have, the music sounds very similar, kind of like how White Wolf is, where all the tracks kind of just blend from one another. Tonic is another very similar one to Bruno.
The one that sends chills down my spine is Hoodoo.
Hoodoo is just a freaky track. It just sounds like someone's rattling around bones in a bag.
It has like no musical vibes to it. It's more just sound effects that are supposed to make the player scared.
And as far as other ambient music goes, there's one, I'm just gonna play it here. I can't describe it. That's the chatter track. I don't even know why they called it that. It's just freaky. Hearing it just makes me think instantly of the Buzzard statues. Otherwise, other upbeat tracks in this game, there's the Jangles track, which also plays when you talk with Gilbert and you get gumbo from Shorty Thurmond at the Cajun cooking gumbo stand. Oh man, this is just such a delightful game for music, honestly, but
I call it your least favorite part of the game.
Yes, because everything else is so good too. I love the suspects, I love the puzzles, I love the story, and I love the atmosphere. The one thing I could say is maybe worse than music is the ending, but the ending of every game just makes me sad, but this is a good ending. Okay, so...
Okay, let's dive into atmosphere because this is going to be quite the analysis here.
This is an outstanding game for atmosphere. It's not just that the atmosphere hits the nail on the head for the concept they're going for, but just that it was such a unique concept that I would have never thought of.
What's your favorite place in the game?
Okay, that's difficult. I love the gardens. I just love that it's drizzling rain. I love Bruno's crypt and all that stuff in the gardens. It's so creepy.
I love just the estate itself. It's
the
so
estate
perfectly done. And especially the secret passageway leading up to Bruno's study.
I'll be honest, I don't like Bruno's study that much. I feel like it's too gray and it's too
Oh my
dark.
God.
There should be a lamp you could turn on in there, like the Ezra Wickford study in Treasure in the Royal Tower.
No, that's what they were going for. I mean, it was...
Well, then again, there's a power outage, but you could just light candles or something.
I loved it. And then Renee's room, probably the scariest place in the game. Something I forgot to say, the first time you go to Renee's room, you get like the first time little cutscene, especially when you look at the doll, lightning strikes, the doll's face lights up, and it's the same exact doll from the last train to Blue Moon Canyon.
Start over. We gotta spend more time on Renee's room, because that's such a well-scripted part of the game, because... Do you want me to start on it?
I was covering it.
Well, yeah, but you went into it too fast. Like,
Okay.
Going into Renee's room for the first time is such a well-scripted part of the game for visual storytelling. The way that works is you go out to this old mausoleum where the Bruno Bollet, where the actual Bollet family members were buried, or entombed, because they don't get buried in New Orleans, and Nancy realizes there's like these weird, cement, gravelly logos and pictures on the front of it, and she says to figure out if there's anything camouflage in that design, I'm gonna have to do a rubbing on it with some paper. And so Renee tells Nancy, hey, I'll give you some paper, here's the key to my room, you can go up there and get some from my nightstand, and also grab me a Cocoa Kringle bar while you're at it, pick up one for yourself. Nancy goes to Renee's room, and this place is freaky. Do you want to cover what's in there?
Yeah, I liked it a lot because the first time you actually gain entrance to her room, there's a couple of, I guess you can call them cutscenes that take place. One of which is...
Start by... You go to the nightstand, and you pick up the paper, and then as soon as you back up, a shadow moves.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay, I'm just gonna re-say that.
Yeah.
The first time you enter Renee's room, a couple of scripted events happen, which makes it so creepy. It's easily the scariest place in the game.
I'd second that, yeah.
You go there for the objective of getting paper, of course, and once you grab the paper, this scared 12-year-old Julian so much, but you hear the door creak open. a shadow shifts in the background, and you can almost faintly hear footsteps too. It's like you don't know whether it's supernatural or if someone's in the room with you. And I remember being so scared that when I was gonna turn around, I was gonna get jump scared or something by the skeleton again.
It's Ethel Boston.
You can turn to the rocking chair, and there is one of the dolls from Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, which is a really clever little homage to the game. I can't remember which doll it is.
Naughty Tina.
It's
the
Naughty.
cracked
I
face.
thought it was Naughty Tina. It had the cracked face. And then you can click on the doll, little zoom in feature, lightning strikes, and the doll's face lights up. It's super creepy. Lightning also strikes again when you turn around and you see Renee's just completely creepy wall. A bunch of hoodoo symbols are on it. It looks like they're painted in blood. It's just, this room and the first time instances that accompany it, it's so scary.
Now, there's one thing that I've grown to really, really, really admire about Renee's Room. And most of the time, you do this sequence after you do the first best sequence with Lamont down at the curio shop. And so if you go to her nightstand, you find on her counter the bottle that was bought from the display, like the sneezing powder and stuff. I can't remember if it's hiccup powder or something.
It was hiccup powder.
It was hiccup powder, yeah. It's there, so you know that Renee frequents Lamont's shop all through visual storytelling with no lines ever exposing this. It's never really even hinted at in dialogue. You can't ask her about the bottle, I don't think. But it's just such a cool, clever way of showing before Gilbert confirms it that Renee is into hoodoo and she believes in all this supernatural stuff.
One of my favorite speeches from Renee is that you can ask her about this little pouch she wears around her neck. And she has this crazy explanation for it, that pouch is what keeps her tied to the center of the universe or something like that.
Yeah.
You can tell that she's just kind of slowly out of her mind and that she believes all these crazy southern hoodoo things, but
Nancy
I don't
just
know.
goes, oh.
Yeah, Nancy's obviously speechless. It's like this character who is so open to you and so inviting once she's knocked out in your foyer. You kind of get the sense that she's not all there in the head. She's pretty creepy, kind of messed up.
Yeah. Oh, man. So, what else is there to touch on?
I mean, no sane person would go to sleep every night in that room.
Yeah, okay.
She's kind of loose there.
She says that she painted that stuff on the wall because there's a spirit living in the wall that said a word to her that was from no language on Earth, and that the spirit was trying to cast a spell on her. So she apparently painted that word on the wall side by side in hoodoo signs, and since then the spirit has never said that word. It's kind of implied that that's the dummy that's in Bruno's study, which is on the other side of the wall, but I don't know for certain.
Okay, now let's talk about the outside crypt part and the swamp.
Oh, I forgot about the swamp.
Yeah, a lot of people do, but it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So, it's like purple skies the entire game. Every time you go outside, whether you're Nancy or Bess, it's just pouring rain. If you want, you can call the cab service at the beginning and they say, "We're sorry, but due to weather conditions in the greater New Orleans area, we will be suspending our cab services for the evening." And so that's how Nancy gets stuck at the estate in the first place. But, going out into the crypts, they have this really nice walking bird's eye view thing where it doesn't show Nancy, it just shows her shadow and you hear her heels clicking whenever she walks. And you just pick a path to go down, and it'll either take you to another set of paths, another crossroad, or to a crypt or some sort. And that's really cool. And at the end of one of the paths, there is the swamp. You want to talk about that, where you're getting the painted conchs, the mushrooms for Renee?
There's a brief puzzle in the game where Renee will ask Nancy to find 5 painted conchs, a really very sketchy mushroom that grows around the parts of Bruno's estate. It kind of looks like an old mushroom with bad acne. That's the way I would describe it. But this puzzle makes the player pretty much search through every single screen in Bruno's estate, and that involves going out to the swamp, the very back of the swamp actually, where she needs to collect the last painted conch. This is a really cool event, as Nancy picks up the conch that's at the end of a log overlooking the swamp.
She kicks the log.
She accidentally kicks it. The log will nudge into the water. Out comes Bruno's great beast of a pet, Bernie the alligator.
Apparently, as Renee says after Nancy narrowly doesn't get eaten by this thing, Bruno used to kick that log to get Bernie's attention and then feed him marshmallows. So that's just a Bruno Bollet charm from the grave. I thought that was funny. What else is there to say about the atmosphere? There is the crazy sequence towards the end of the game where Nancy needs Bess to go back to the curio shop. She actually breaks in the back by using her makeup on the passcode and put on a the skeleton costume that's in the back of the shop. And you're supposed to go to this creepy back alley covered in cockroaches and just pouring rain and knock on this door, and then a little hatch opens up and a man in a skeleton costume asks you, "What's the password?" And the way you find this out is that in Bruno's study, he has a calendar saying that May 31st, that's today, there is a meeting of the Jolly Rogers crew at Rampart and Domain, which is where Bess is, and that the password is Scuttled Bones. Also, one time we were playing this game on May 31st when Nancy said, "May 31st, that's today," and we started freaking out.
Yeah, that was crazy. And I just realized that this mystery takes span over a couple of hours.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny to me.
Uh-huh.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, we'll cover it under atmosphere because it's a new part of the game, but you can't really explore it. It's more or less just a cutscene.
Bess
We
gets into
covered
the meeting.
cutscene already, though.
Well, we should probably cover about, like, just what happens in it. Bess goes into the meeting. They start chanting the name Jean Lafitte at the opening of the meeting, which is what you're supposed to find out for Nancy. And then, like, Bruno, it's probably the creepiest shot in the game. Gilbert is the lead skeleton, and he's in his suit, and he's all masked up, and he has this weird maraca thing that he just starts, like, shaking across the screen, and it makes such a creepy noise, and you recognize it instantly from the beginning of the game in the foyer where Nancy got attacked. And he starts talking about Jolly Rogers business sort of things, and Bess is just like, "I know that voice." Then Bess's phone goes off, she gets compromised, and she just calls out and straight up doxes Gilbert Buford as the group leader in front of everyone when they take the bag off of her head. It's a creepy sequence when Bess gets kidnapped, because everyone turns to look at her and someone throws a burlap sack over her head. And essentially, Bess says, "Oh, I know that you're the one who attacked my friend at the Bole Mansion today, and I want answers, Buford." And Buford just goes, "The young lady clearly is hysterical and doesn't know what she's talking about." He just leans in here and goes, "I will tell you everything, Miss Marvin, in due time." And then it just cuts to Nancy on the phone with Bess. And what's really, really spooky about this phone call is that it makes Gilbert look almost like he could be the culprit, because we know that he's the skeleton man, and Bess goes, "Uh-oh. I actually told Mr. Buford that you were very close to finding the crystal skull." And she goes like, "Well, that's okay. But he left right after the meeting, and I don't think he went back to his gumbo stand or anything like that. What if he's on his way over there?" And Nancy tries to debunk Bess's worries. Lightning crackles, and Bess goes, "Whoa, that was a huge thunderstrike. Bess, are you there?" And the phone's dead.
If Buford was the culprit of this game, that would have been a crazy segue into the finale, but I mean, it didn't take that route, obviously. But it really made the player on edge, I can tell you from first-hand experience.
Okay, just wrapping up atmosphere, I think my favorite place is definitely the garden. I love Renee's little so-called lantern-lit corner of the world. I like the fountain with the spider in it. Bruno's crypt is super cool. Just all the obscure flowers and the painted conchs, and by extension out of the cemetery too. What about you, Julian? You got a final place you love?
Just the estate, really. I can't really pick a favorite room, but I mean, I guess Renee's room is the darkest, it's the creepiest place, but it's not like I can call that my favorite. I just love the New Orleans type eerie vibe that this estate has. From every room, from the secret passageway up top, just to the living quarters.
Yep. And that brings us into the ending of the game. Now, we'll be brief to cover this because I know we've dragged down on a lot of details. But in short, Nancy needs 3 instrumental pieces to open up Bruno's crypt. First is kind of difficult to find. You go past these fireflies in the garden, and you push out these rocks on the wall, which make a makeshift staircase on the other side of it, where Nancy can then walk up to the top of the gate and pull off this little spear thing that's on top of the banister. And so she takes that, and then you don't use that for the rest of the game until the end. It's you can pick it up like right after you talk to Bruno if you want, talk to Henry if you want to, but it doesn't hold any use till the end of the game. Next, you need to get the skeleton handle of the skeleton shovel that you need for the Charlie Wicker grave puzzle. That is kind of creepy because it snaps off of the shovel and Nancy just keeps it in her inventory. And then finally, once you get all 25 glass eyes, put them in the frame where they belong in Bruno's study and get them in the right configuration, it opens up revealing one giant glass eye the size of like a cantaloupe.
You put them all together and it makes a really creepy, I don't even know how to begin it. You put the glass eye, the huge glass eye, inside the hand of the skeleton shovel.
And then you put the skeleton shovel in the weird spear thing and you jam it into Bruno's crypt like a key.
Yeah, it's like a massive key. And then you get just a brilliant cutscene. Bruno's crypt opens up and Nancy crawls down.
Lightning strikes the buzzards, and it, like, shoots a Raiders of the Lost Ark beam, like the Message in a Haunted Mansion Pharaoh banister. The Phoenix. And the whole time, the legend track is playing in perfect sync.
The crypt opens up, and Nancy walks down it. There, on a pedestal, is the crystal skull, and it looks beautiful.
It is
honestly, it's so
really
cool.
pretty.
You can pick it up, you can look at it, and all this stuff. Here's where we get the culprit reveal. Renee.
The crypt starts closing above her, like some real Indiana Jones stuff. And Renee comes and goes, Nancy, girl, what are you doing down there or something? And she goes, help, Renee, the crypt is closing, quick. And Renee goes, here, I'll help you, Nancy. Just toss up whatever you're holding now.
No, don't do it. Don't do it.
Nancy just hurls the crystal skull at her and she goes, the crystal skull? Why, after all that scheming to get Dr. Boulay to hand it over to me and find it in his estate, well, how do I get it in the end? This nice Yankee gal just hands it to me. Thank you, Nancy. Bye now.
Obviously, Renee was the one that forged the authenticator note. It was a really cool, like, just plot to kill Dr. Boulay. I really liked it.
It was like a real murder mystery.
It was a 200 IQ move on her part. But then, thankfully, Bruno established a kind of like a safety.
That's like
a safety puzzle in case he ever got locked in his own crypt for some reason.
You know, like, besides when he gets cremated, but still.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's an easy puzzle. It's just like a matching puzzle.
It's a matching puzzle, but you can only see the symbols when lightning illuminates the screen once every like 2 seconds or so. So it gets a little tedious, but I mean, it's something you can typically solve on your first try.
You follow Renee's footprints out to the swamp once you're out of there, and you get her motorboat going, and she's on her outboard motorboat just about to take off in the New Orleans swamp with the crystal skull. I don't know what she thinks she's doing, but she gives this crazy rant about how the skull is mine, and I'm gonna be there when I assemble it with the other 12 skulls and the secrets of the universe are revealed. How crazy would it be if they made another game where you were going after like a different crystal skull?
13 games after it, each one's a crystal skull.
Just a new franchise. But anyhow, during her classic trademark villain monologue, you kick Bernie's log, and he comes out of the water looking for his marshmallows, and he sees Renee holding a giant shiny skull, cackling to herself in her boat. And he jumps up at her. Renee throws the skull in the air by mistake. Bernie catches it square in his mouth, swallows a whole crystal skull, and then just goes back disappointed that he has no marshmallows.
I am conflicted on the ending, but I mean, it's just like, you gotta love it at the end of the day.
It's a goofy ending. They found a way to purpose Bernie besides just making Bruno a kooky guy who fed alligators marshmallows.
But I love the ending cuts. I love the ending credits, especially Lamont's wrap-up.
Yeah.
Lamont's been going after Bernie every hour of his time he has available. He's just scavenging the swamp for Bernie so he can cough up this crystal skull.
I don't even know who he thinks he's going to sell it to. There probably is a good market for it. Buford comes by and apologizes to Nancy at the mansion for beating her up, so maybe he was on his way to the mansion just to say sorry to Nancy. Renee gets arrested, I guess, on manslaughter charges or something, because technically she was, like, directly responsible or indirectly responsible for Bruno's murder. Henry finds out that in the will, Bruno wanted to leave the skull to him, and he set up all these puzzles for him to find it, so there goes Nancy, ruining someone's birthright again or something. But
we don't get a resolution with him in Summer, do we?
No, I assume that he breaks it off with Summer.
I would hope so. I hope he becomes absolutely rich.
Yeah, because there's like a really touching shot of Henry sitting over by this one tree overlooking the cemetery, just kind of contemplating the fact that his uncle actually did care about him and he wanted him to have his most precious heirloom.
It was beautiful, yeah.
And endgame credits roll, Phantom of Venice teaser plays, and that is Nancy Drew Legend of the Crystal Skull.
It's just awesome.
Okay, so for the rating of this game, our formula for rating Nancy Drew games, we don't like to give numbers out of 10 because some Nancy Drew games are better on paper than they are in practice. So we rate using letters. A is good, F is bad, S is reserved for the best of the best. Where does this game belong to you?
Okay, so I'm looking over the 6 factors now. I'm gonna give a super brief thing on each of them. Story and premise. This game is awesome because the story shifts seamlessly from objective to objective. It starts off with who's the skeleton man, and then it morphs into who forged this authenticator note / is the crystal skull real / where is it. That was really well done. The suspects are great. These are the most lifelike suspects we've ever had in a game, and I don't know, I just feel like I'm in the room with them. Their animations are great. I love their dialogue. Puzzles, this game's great on puzzles too. There's a couple that are tough, but for the most part, they're all super fun, super enjoyable. Music, one of my favorite parts of the game. Obviously, we played my favorite tracks. They just fit the atmosphere so well. Atmosphere. This game's great on atmosphere. It nails what it was going for with the eerie, spooky, southern hoodoo vibes. And then the ending, I love the ending. It's a perfect mix of comedy and like seriousness, and it just wraps up Henry's plot so well that his uncle truly did love him. All in all, I am giving this game an S. It is a awesome Nancy Drew game. Highly recommend.
Okay, so I feel like I have a lot of bias that I need to recognize for this game since it was my first one. And also, I feel like the atmosphere is an acquired taste to enjoy this Southern Gothic ambiance. Some people probably go into this game just like, well, this is lame. I don't get to have any fun conversation with Bess and George. There's no really nice characters to just goof around with. There's no timed puzzles. There are no, like, timed puzzles in this game, by the way. Sometimes it feels like there's no real peril, but I gotta say, this game is exceptional at pacing itself story-wise. I would maybe call this the best Nancy Drew game when it comes to story-wise. There's a few others that contend it. I wanted to give it an A going into this review to be safe and like say how some people might just not dig the vibe and it's hit or miss, but nope, I'm going with an S. This is our second double S that we're handing out next to Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. This game is, it's phenomenal in every single category.
I'd highly recommend to a new player or just a returning player. It excels in everything in my opinion.
Yeah, this is a perfect game for just any recommendation of any player. And I think that it should be paraded more. More games should be taken after the inspiration of this. And someday, I swear, I'm going to adapt this into a movie.
Please let us know what your thoughts on the game too. Please speak out if you don't like the game because we'd love to hear opinions. We know that one of the most revered Nancy Drew YouTubers, Arglefumph, he doesn't share the same feelings about this game.
Oh yeah,
and that's interesting to me. So if you feel similar to Arglefumph, please let us know why, because it's super fun to read everyone's opinions on what makes or breaks a Nancy Drew game.
And if you comment on one of our reviews, I promise we will get back to you. We got all the time in the world.
Yeah. So, thanks so much for listening, everybody.
Be sure to check out our Crystal Skull long play. I had to play it 3 times because we lost the footage the first time, and the second time I managed to glitch it by answering the phone as soon as the secret passageway opened. So, yeah, that's always some nice Southern Gothic voodoo hoodoo vibes if you'd like to keep you busy. Anyhow, take care, everybody.
Vote for Holt.
Vote for Holt.